Welcome to the Occupational Safety Leadership Podcast, episode number 222. And in today's episode, we're going to sit down and do a little introduction to hazardous waste. And this is Phil from Hazmat Scholar. So, Phil, could you just take a couple seconds and introduce yourself and kind of go over why that you wanted to venture into the field of hazmat?
Yeah, absolutely. So, thank you very much for the introduction, David. Look, this is my very first podcast, so I'm excited to be on, and thank you for letting me just present what I know to you and your audience. And so, I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, so I've been dealing with hazardous materials and hazardous waste for 25 years now. And I started in the hazardous waste disposal industry back in the late 90s. And during that time, I was a field chemist. I did lab packing. I did a lot of chemical waste disposal on the disposer side of it, so picking up from generators of hazardous waste primarily. Did that for a number of years. Drove a truck and got a lot of experience driving a Class B CDL vehicle, and so I'm familiar with all those interesting nuances too. But after a period of time, the way life goes, job changes and all that, I found myself in the aerospace industry, which I'm currently in. But as a side venture, I started Hazmat Scholar to help fill in some of these voids and gaps that generators may have in their thinking, where many times when I came on site, I was dealing with the safety guy, and the safety guy has waste, and but may not have a solid environmental background, but still, environmental health and safety professional. Guess what? That's the hat you're going to be wearing, and those are the manifests you'll be signing. And they knew enough to be dangerous, but many times there's holes in the games. And that's what I've been learning and in understanding over my career is that no matter how long you've been in this field, you're going to find you don't know everything. And to find the answers to that information is why I started Hazmat Scholar, which is why I'm here today. So, I don't know everything, and the reason I put scholar as part of my little ventures name is there's a couple definitions to scholar. One of them is they know everything. Sure, they're very aware of what they need to know, and they know it through and through. Yes, that's one component, and I know quite a bit, but I don't know everything. That's why I love that third definition of the Webster's Dictionary of a scholar is a lifelong learner and trying to continually learn, which is what we do to be successful in our field. So, yeah, so that's me in Hazmat Scholar.
Hmm. Well, Phil, you just happened to be talking to a young guy who didn't know anything about haz waste. And during the interview process, I basically said, I don't know anything about hazardous waste, but I bet you I can figure it out. And I was kind of amazed at all the rules. I just kind of figured you put it in a drum, I call somebody, I label it up, and away it goes. But I had to do all the inspections and figure out the whole what was it called again? The whole profile and who can service what and how far it's driving. And I was like, wow, this is like a whole field. I literally thought it was just this add-on that would be like an hour a week, But yeah, it was really something.
It's a lot more in depth. And of course, you have two different governing agencies over your hazardous waste. Well, OSHA's in there a little bit, of course,
Yeah.
but when the materials are drummed up, they're in the storage area, or they come out of the storage area and get onto the truck. All of a sudden, RECRA rules, EPA, and USDOT hazmat rules come into play, and they don't always play nice. And there's many times where as a field chemist, I looking at a material, I'm like, I need a manifest, and then I need a straight bill of lading because one meets the rule or a definition of a waste, whereas the other one doesn't, even though it's still being shipped off as waste. And it can get complicated quick, especially for someone as a young man, as you were describing, trying to figure it out and realizing how many pages of information I have? 40 CFR
Yeah.
262. What? And then
Yep.
the cross-referencing and you get paper cuts trying to figure this out.
Hmm.
It's insane. The US DOT, which is the what I specialize in, has about 8,500 pages of information. EPA, last I heard, is like 30 some thousand. Now, the record side of it's smaller subset of that, but holy cow.
Right,
That's a
right.
lot for, what I understand is, you focus on a lot of safety things. And so OSHA 29 CFR has got its own stack of information and regulations that you need to be aware of. But, well, let's just pile on 49 CFR and 40 CFR and see where we go.
Oh,
So,
that's right. That's right. That's right. Exactly. So, and luckily, I had it really easy. My profile, I had a corrosive one. At one point, we had some arsenic, but I mean, it was really easy because it was very single focused. It wasn't a lot of mixtures. It was easy to go back and look at the pH and say, well, I know it meets the definition of corrosive, and all that. Could you kind of go over the definition of hazardous waste for the
yeah,
audience?
hazardous waste is a subset of the solid waste rules under 40 CFR. And hazardous waste then is a chemical that exhibits a characteristic, and those characteristics could be flammable, ignitable, corrosive, toxic, or reactive. And those are some general characteristics. They carry codes D001, D002. D001 is flammable, D2 is for corrosives, D003 reactive, and then it gets into the toxics, which are chemicals that are listed out. Then for the even more dangerous materials, you have P lists, which are acutely hazardous materials, and then the U listed materials as well. And there's K codes, F codes, all sorts of codes, and you need to know your waste in order to ship it off right to apply the appropriate waste code to that shipment. Now, you had described just in your scenario when you were shipping off an arsenic or a flammable material. What do you do? And if you're new to this game, you need to get trained, number one, but you're going to forget a lot of the information after you've been trained because there's just so much to know. One of the things I like to recommend to any generator of hazardous waste, get to know your hazardous waste disposal vendor quite well. Not only the sales guy, and they're going to want your business, and it's easy to get them to talk to you. It's the person that comes on site, the field chemist who's doing a lab pack for you. The If you have a tank washout, those field services guys that are going to spray that out for you, collect that effluent, and put it into a tanker. Get to know them well. And also the folks that are back in the office that you call to help create your profile. They are instrumental in guiding you and helping you classify your hazardous material. So before we started recording, you had mentioned that what do you do with these mixtures? And they're so confusing. And let's say you've only done single ingredient hazardous waste shipments. Then also you come across this unique mixture. It's some sludge, and you don't know what that might be. There's some water in there. There's some greasy film at the top, and it pH'd. Yeah.
Hmm.
What are you going to do? That's where you really rely on your hazardous waste vendor and say, hey, help me out here. What do I got? How do we want to dispose of this? And then you're going to find out what their recommendation is through a profile. Now, you're going to provide them as much information as you can on that material. Where did it come from? Did you scrape it off the sidewalk? Was it from a spill cleanup? Was it just from a process, a piece of machinery that just need to get cleaned out? And that'll help with that characterization, whether it's going to carry a D code, one of those D001 to threes, or one of the larger number D003, D00 numbers, or K, F, P, or U codes. And that's what they'll help you figure out, apply. Might require some testing, things called T clips. Now I'm forgetting the acronym, but I did a whole post on it a number of months ago.
There are a
Toxic,
lot of acronyms out there.
y-
Yeah.
there are, and so Toxic leaching, something. Okay, yeah, I'll have it for us before we leave today. But T-clip, TCLP is
Yeah, right, right.
what it's known as, and that will let you know what is coming out of it in a landfill type scenario, and which codes, which thresholds it exceeds, and what codes will need to be applied to those wastes. So yeah, rely on your hazardous waste vendor to do that. But I know the question comes up, David. Well, how do I get a hold of one of these guys? Or do I even need to have someone take care of this for me? And so more often than not, you want to be a good steward of the hazardous wastes that you do generate. And EPA has a great website out there to help you figure out what kind of generator you are. There are three generator statuses: very small quantity, small quantity generator, and large quantity generator. And that's based on what you generate in a month. So if you have a non-acute material, and we can get into what those are if you really want, but a non-acute material would be like a typical flammable, let's say a gasoline
Hmm.
or an acetone, and you're allowed to accumulate up to 100 kilos or 220 pounds of that material. Uh, I'm sorry, generate that amount. Accumulation is a different threshold. It's even higher. You can accumulate a lot more than you need to necessarily generate. But if you exceed that 220, the EPA has a nice table. You can look it up. I actually have it on my computer here to the left. You go under Hazardous Waste Generator Regulatory Summary.
Hmm.
Just e- just Google that, EPA, and then Hazardous Waste Generator Regulatory Summary. There's a beautiful table where they describe each of those categories, what those thresholds are for the generator status, how much you can accumulate over the course of a year, what the requirements are for you as a particular generator, and my recommendation: stay a very small quantity generator because you have a lot less to do as a very small quantity generator than even as the mid-tier generator stats with a small quantity. But then you have everything to do when you become a large quantity generator, which includes biannual reports. You're constantly you have to have EPID numbers. There's a lot that goes into it. And then
Right.
who knows if you're experiencing air permitting issues, if you're going to need to get into water discharge. Those large generators have a lot of balls to juggle for sure, and that's
Yeah.
outside of the waste. So yeah,
Right, 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 right. I think mine was mostly sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, had some, trying to think if there was anything else like on the flammable side. Most of my stuff was more like corrosive stuff then, for the most part then. So that was relatively easy to go back, because you can sit down, you can do the research, you know that it's a acid to start with, and then you know that it's going to be under two,
yeah.
so really
Mhm.
easy. Could you go over a couple of the like particulars for the audience on things like flammability and corrosiveness?
Yeah, flammability and corrosivity.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'd have to take a minute to look at those definitions, but that does bring me to a good point. Like, what are the definitions uh, I- of those particular materials? Now, we're starting to encounter two different regulatory criteria
Right,
for
exactly.
these.
Hmm.
So we have the EPA,
Hmm.
which, as you said, for corrosivity, we'll use that one for simplicity's sake,
Hmm.
is pHs 2 or less or 12 and a half or greater
Right,
on the pH scale. Now, did you know DOT doesn't use pH?
right, exactly.
And
That's
so
why that it's really hard.
right. And so DOT looks at how quickly that liquid uh, get, can corrode steel or skin.
Mhm.
And so there's these corrosivity rates that they use. And then if it falls within that, then it's DOT corrosive. But EPA, on the other hand, is using the pH scale. And while I'm looking up the definitions for that. And this is a great tip for your audience too. Always go to the definitions.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm just going to Google EPA uh, characteristic, if I could spell.
It's always
Uh,
easy when nobody's watching you.
I know. It, and you're gonna get a great little summary. Okay, so yeah, EPA has a site called Hazardous Waste Characteristics. I got this document that it just brought up the rules for ignitable liquids,
Mhm.
rules for corrosivity, reactivity. While I'm scrolling down to the ignitability, because you did ask about that
Yeah.
definition, EPA, it was very interesting when they were putting these rules together in the 70s. Uh, the one industry that lobbied hard for the pH to be not 2.5, which is what they originally wanted on the acidic side of the pH
Oh.
scale, was the soda pop industry.
Mhm.
And if you pH a Coke or Pepsi, and I probably should be using, company names, but if you
Right.
do,
Mhm.
they're
Mhm.
going to be
Yeah.
acids.
Yeah.
And I mean, that pH paper is going to change and it's going to change acidic. But most of it is just above a 2. And so if EPA set 2.5 as the corrosivity rate, every single can of Coke or Pepsi or container might have that black corrosive 8 label on it.
Right, right, right.
And so then you start thinking about, oh, what am I drinking?
Right, right.
So that was just a fun little thing I learned over my years is being out in the field. But
Yeah.
ignitability you asked about.
Yeah.
So the characteristic waste definition under RECRA for ignitability D001 is ignitable wastes have a flash point less than 60 degrees C or 140 degrees F.
Mhm.
And their examples include waste oils and solvents. There are certain particular ways, lab tests, that they determine ignitability. They use something called the Penske-Martin's closed cup method, the SATA flash closed cup method, method 1030, and of course, there's all sorts of links to how do you determine that. Well,
Right.
your hazardous waste provider can also do those for you. We talked about corrosivity already, and then reactivity. Reactivity is D003. And, David, I'll ask you, what do you think a reactive material is?
This is one I struggle with because, well, the one I think about are the different acids out there. I guess probably like sulfuric acid, it's awesome all by itself, but when you start adding to it, it will like react, it'll off gas, it'll do all kinds of things.
And then how do you test for that?
Well, I look at the SDS sheet, but you're right. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know how to actually test, and the SDS sheets are really good now. They were not that good back in the 80s, but they
Right,
were. I mean, they were adequate for what we had, of course.
right.
Right.
Yes,
But
yes.
yes, I always struggled with that.
So reactivity, if it's not like a firework or an explosive or a self-polymerizing material.
Hmm.
So those are all reactive. Of course, we'd all agree, yes, those react.
Right. Right.
EPA's definition is very broad and a little challenging. It says reactive wastes are unstable under normal conditions. They can cause explosions, undergo violent reactions, generate toxic fumes, gases, or vapors, or explosive mixtures when heated, compressed, or mixed with water. So the examples they're giving in this particular entry is lithium sulfur batteries and explosives.
Ah, okay. Okay.
Now, it does give a definition under 261.23. And what it said in 2009, which is uh, the report that I'm reading from, is there are currently no test methods available. That's still
Hmm.
true.
Is
It's
it
it,
is Isn't that going to be hard to enforce a law when there's not a test? Unless, of course, you just use your operator knowledge, of
and
course.
that's you're exactly
Okay,
you're
gotcha.
falling right. It's that
Hmm.
operator knowledge. It's that generator awareness. It's asking your R&D folks, if you have R&D folks, what's this do, and how concerned do we need to be? Now, when you get into explosives, which are clearly a reactive material, especially it was clear in their definition that I just read you. there is a whole other series of tests that they go through. It's the UN Orange Book series of tests, the manual of tests and criteria. If your audience doesn't know, it's a great read if you need to have insomnia and need to fall asleep at night. But but they are doing all sorts of tests on this material, which includes cooking it in an oven, dropping it from heights. Now, these are all prescribed in the UN manual testing criteria. There's adding spark or some sort of ignition source. This Cohen test is what's come into mind. They add friction to it using these friction scrapers that go across the surface of the material.
Oh, awesome.
And then yeah, and then they let you know, this USDOT test lab will tell you, is this an explosive or not? And for those folks who don't manufacture explosives, more than likely you're not going to fall into the technical definition of explosive. And so what do you do then? Do I have reactive material on my hands? Well, EPA does like it does allow generators to overestimate the hazard that you may have. But then you start conflicting with,
Interesting.
yes. So you can, EPA does allow non-hazardous waste to be managed as hazardous, especially if you're uncertain. Now, let's say you
Oh, okay.
have,
Yes, yes.
now let's say you are, just want to be a good steward. You just want to send everything out as has, even your non-hazardous material.
Hmm.
EPA has no problem with that. Throw on the waste code, send it on its way. Guess who has a problem with that? USDOT.
Oh, yeah, yeah, right.
USDOT does not allow overclassification. So even though you're going to have
Hmm.
some flexibility under the RECRA scheme, USDOT Hazmat's going to say, no, yeah, you're going to have to,
Interesting. I don't
yes.
think I don't think that I've ever heard it from that angle before. I've heard that they're somewhat close, but they conflict in a lot of areas. But very, very interesting, Phil.
So
Hmm.
yeah, they would be very clear. So if you call the Hazmat, so USDOT has something called the Hazmat info line.
Hmm.
And they have this great group of people that are there from 9 to 5 East Coast time. Uh, and they're you throw any hazmat or haz waste shipping question to them. Now they're not going to help you with your record waste codes. They don't
Right.
know anything about that. But
Mhm.
they will, you ask them, can I ship a non-hazardous material as hazardous? They will say no, you cannot. And here is a letter of interpretation from the USDOT explaining why.
Hmm.
Um, now, depending on the complexity of your question, it might take them a minute to find that letter of interpretation, or it could take
Right.
25 minutes on hold. But
Right.
you're
Right.
going to
Right.
get a good perspective of what the USDOT thinks from their series of letters of interpretation that they have.
Oh, okay.
So
Good. Good.
yeah,
Good.
and don't be afraid to call the USDOT Hazmat info line. Um, it- Number one, it's actually contractors that are running the info line.
Hmm.
Now they're trained this to the same level as their the pure DOT employee
Hmm.
who's doing the hazmat. But the one thing that I've come to understand over the past 2 decades of doing this is that EPA has a more aggressive, offensive approach to compliance,
Hmm.
whereas DOT, they're more collegial.
Hmm.
They want you to do it right. And especially if the shipment hasn't occurred yet, and you ask this question, "Hey, I'm debating this. How do I ship this correctly?"
Hmm.
Just be honest with them,
Right. Right.
and they will say, "Here's our recommendation." And or if you have a more nuanced or technical question, they might defer to a different team within USDOT. But for the most part, you're going to get a thought and idea
Hmm.
directly from the horse's mouth
Oh, good.
of where you need to go. So yeah, so if you go to USDOT's, just Google DOT Hazmat Info Center,
Hmm.
and you will get their contact information. And it's a great resource to go. So
Perfect. Perfect.
so we have not talked about the definition of toxicity yet. So we can definitely scroll down to that at least here. And hey, we remember how I forgot TCLP?
Yeah.
Well, it's the toxicity characteristic leaching procedure method 1311. So
Hmm.
so there you go. That's the TCLP. And those are the D numbers after 04 through 70 or is it into the hundreds? I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's a long list.
Hmm.
And then the other toxic materials are P and U codes. So, but then there's the F and K codes, which are solvents that go through processes. But I don't know if we have time to get into that because that can get
Speaking of
challenging.
time, Phil, we just happen to
Yes,
be bumping up on time. Could you spend a couple seconds and let the folks know how that they can find you and get some of their questions answered? And we didn't even cover hardly anything I wanted to cover. So at the end, after we finish, I want to sit down and kick around some dates and have you back on for a part two, and then we can
certainly.
wrap up a few things. But if you can take a couple seconds, let the folks know how to find you out there.
Yeah. So in 2023, I started Hazmat Scholar to help answer these questions that you might run into, just like the ones we were describing. And so if you go to LinkedIn and find me at Hazmat Scholar, I will come up. It's kind of a tannish background, and there's this little flowering plant that's in the front of it. I have a colleague who's based out of California, and you'll see his face there next to mine. And so California has their own set of challenging rules. So I wanted to have a friend that I could call when I have California questions. And so
Hmm.
his name's Kurt, and he's helps me out with the California stuff. And so I'm really good at shipping hazardous waste, and giving you good thoughts and ideas on what to do. Currently, I don't charge anything, but in the near future, that I'm going to hopefully make that change. And but
Hmm.
right now, this is a passion for me, and I really enjoy it.
Hmm.
The challenge of it and the ever-changing nature of it kind of speaks to me.
Fantastic, Phil.
Yeah,
And uh, uh, and thank you for joining us today. And with that, we wrap up episode 222 with Phil from Hazmat Scholar, and we talked a little bit. I was hoping to finish it all on hazardous waste, but a little bit about hazardous waste. So, and with that, I want to thank everybody and have a safe day.